but it's also a consciousness, you know. And I remember in the 80s, I worked in the criminal justice system. I was working as a counselor for a halfway house in Washington, D.C. And at that time, it was just before all of the, or the majority of the halfway houses for both the mentally ill and for those who are coming out of prison, reentry halfway houses. Federal funding changed. I guess it was the trickle-down effect that kind of had the opposite impact. But all of our homeless shelters around the country, or many of them, were closed. And I mean, they closed, and then you had all these people. And the question that many of us who were in the field were asking ourselves, well, what's going to happen? And there was no contingency plan.
Right.
All of a sudden, today they're mentally ill. The facility closes. Tomorrow, they're normal.
Right, right.
But they're on the street without any services. And that was the beginning, I think, of a real downward swing that is leading us to where we are now. What often frightens me or concerns me is that when you couple that with regentrification in many of our urban areas now, as people are coming back into the city, then the homes and facilities that were available, or even spaces where those who could not afford, you know, major rents and so forth, they're now those areas are now being regentrified, so they're now middle income housing, and the poor are disappearing. And what has interested me for the last couple of years, I always ask when we come into a city, well, where have the poor gone? And often the answer I get is, I don't know. I just asked that in Houston. Where are the poor going? And people say, I don't know. Now, I did some further research when we left Chicago, and I got the same answer. And what I found was that they're being moved to outlying areas, suburban areas. And one of the concerns that I had, and this has now been at least 3 major cities I've tracked this, is that they're being moved into outlying areas where there are limited services and transportation also is limited. So what that means is, one, they're not able to travel easily to get employment, so they get locked into a system of poverty. And they're so isolated that it becomes sort of out of mind, out of sight, out of mind. And there are a lot of issues that aren't being dealt with through the system. And in fact, now with the economic downturn, one of the areas hardest hit is services to the poor and unemployed.
Right. Those are the things that are, unfortunately, not necessarily the political climate. I hate to say that, the collective mentality at the moment in these times, where there's an economic downturn, the knee-jerk reaction is to cut funding for projects where services are needed more and more. So where some services need to be increased during these times, you cut the funding for it, and it just makes the problem worse. And it's a cycle that feeds on itself and amplifies itself as we go along. With the this issue around, it's kind of a not in my backyard type of thing. And if it's not in my backyard, it's easy for me not to pay attention. And that is it makes it easy for people to leave that collective sense of responsibility, to abandon it, because you don't see it. And that I'm not sure. A lot of people like to say that it's orchestrated. I can see how it could be orchestrated, how it could be just happen that way. It's just easier for us to avoid certain things and to push people out into these situations. But those do plant the seeds of greater problems tomorrow.
Exactly. Let me ask you a question. In terms of your walk, again, an 1,800-mile walk from Houston to L.A. to bring awareness to the homeless, did you have any inspiring moments where you were with the homeless, you heard a story that just really like touched your heart or opened your eyes? Are there any stories like that you've had experienced on your walk?
There was, things rarely came instantaneously. They were just realizations I found myself growing into. And I was in a border town on the Navajo reservation, and it was I walked up to a gas station, and at the gas station, there are these winos outside. This little convenience store. Winos outside. And they were talking loud to each other, and one of them came up to me and asked me for some change, and another one came up to me and had this funny story about the shirt that he was wearing. And in all their eyes, you could see the hopelessness. And it shocked me because it felt like I was on Martin Luther King in my neighborhood at one of the convenience stores. It's the exact same scene, except for everybody there was either Pueblo or Navajo or Apache, and the same circumstances playing themselves out amongst different people at the same time, and it's expressing itself in the same way. And that, one of the things I'm looking for is not necessarily in my head. I knew we all stood in the same place, in the same shoes, but I want to experience it and see how other people lived it. And that was one of those moments where it became clear to me that I had seen that all along the way. It was just very starkly different at this one moment in time. That little time on the Navajo reservation had a couple moments like that, where it brought forth to me the fact that we're different peoples all over. But when there is where there's poverty, and the poverty and homelessness is a lot of it is really about hopelessness. Where there's hopelessness, there's the same type of suffering, the same type of pain. It expresses itself the same type of way, the same way, and it's probably going to be the same solutions, a lot of the same solutions, the same mentality behind the solutions and the plans to help solve these issues, to help ease that suffering and pull people up. And that was like one of the deepest things that happened to me and I experienced as far as people were concerned.
Right. What was, I guess I want to ask the obvious question, and that is, did you accomplish what you set out to do?
I accomplished everything I set out to do, and then at the same time, I kind of accomplished not much of the stuff I set out to do. Originally, I wanted to, by the end of the walk, I planned on walking this 1,800 miles and going and getting a job at some engineering firm and making money for the most part. Didn't work out like that. I also wanted to make homelessness a firm part of the national debate. Because one of the things I realized when I was investigating the phenomenon of homelessness is that it's not one issue. You get 10 homeless people in a room, you have 10 different issues that they come from 10 different places. One was made homeless because of health care. Their spouse had illness, and the bills went way up. The insurance kicked them off, and they wound up losing the house. That's what 2 or 3 of them became homeless. Another group, it could be tied, a direct link to the educational system, the prison system, and several other different reasons. Mental health would be about 5 of those. 6 of the other group. And we have to look at all of these issues in order to end homelessness. And so that's what really got me into it, because I'm ultimately, since 11th grade, 12th grade, I've been on not necessarily a crusade per se, but I've been really putting a lot of thought into making the world a better place.
Well, I think
back then it was,
I think you qualify as a crusade. You walked 1,800 miles.
So
I think crusade is okay.
I might have a couple of stripes on that. But that was the goal, to make it a bigger thing. And so I wanted as an outcome, I wanted to raise $1 million for this for homeless service providers across the country. I wanted to make it a part of the national debate, and I wanted to impact people who saw it and inspire them to get out and not necessarily walk across the country, but do amazing things. Like that little voice inside of you, the little child inside of you, the question inside of your mind, the consciousness, the group mentality oftentimes allows us and almost encourages us to squash that. But that is not necessarily, that little voice is who we are, who we're supposed to be, who we can be. And if we embrace that, a lot of things would change drastically. And so that was like my third major thing. national debate, not exactly. $1 million, nowhere near. And inspiration, it's done some of that.
Yeah.
And so looking back on it, it started off all of these programs. It started off going. It did a lot towards accomplishing all of that, but none of it's done yet.
Right.
And so I'm still at it.
Right.
I'm not necessarily walking now, but I have programs that I work on, and I try to keep what happened, because what happened was it was a really powerful experience.
Of course.
It built up a lot of potential energy that I can turn into kinetic energy now, and that's what I'm doing with it now, trying to make sure that I use that, the power built up. It's almost like I pushed the boulder up to the top of a hill, like my dad used to say, and now I'm just trying to letting it roll down the hill.
Right, but you want to keep it going on the path that you set.
As much as possible, as much as possible.
Well, I want to encourage you in that, Noah. I have a lot of questions I want to ask you. Let me take 1 second just to say you're listening to Peace Talks on Life Conversations Radio, where we want you to be your highest self. We want you to be the change that you want to see in the world. And so we try to bring shows and to our and sounds of music to our listening audience that inspire, uplift, motivate, and challenge. We certainly do that here on Peace Talks with Audri Scott Williams. I want to revisit a couple of things. I want to go back to take our audience as you're walking across the country. What became your brick wall that you had to push through in order to make it to the end? I mean, did you just say, I'm going to make it to the end no matter what happens, and you just went for it? Or were there moments within your own body, within your own psyche, obstacles that seemed insurmountable that you had to, that was your moment to either this walk was going to happen or you were going to stop right there?
There's several of those moments, and I'm going to try to run those down kind of quick. The first one was before I left. I was at a bus station downtown Houston, and I came to a philosophical fork in the road. Down the left path was career, down the right path was this walk. There was a good chance that me doing this walk would take me in a place that would put off the possibilities and minimize the possibilities of me going into engineering or physics and into that and going down that other path. And I asked myself, okay, Noah, if you take either path, which would you rather see yourself look back from 5 years down the road, and after a car accident, you got 3 minutes to look back at your life. Which path would you rather have taken? The path towards working every day and saving up money and for whatever, or the path of doing this walk, even if you do nothing else, and you have a possibility that you can help quite a few people in doing this outside of yourself. And I decided that if I was on my deathbed in 5 years, I'd rather look back and see that I've done this.
Okay.
And so that was when I decided that it's really going to happen. On the trip, I looked up a lot of different people who walked around the country, and I came across this woman called the Peace Pilgrim.
Yes.
And I had heard a video or saw some writing of hers, and she said you can be a pilgrim to a place or for a thing. And in a way, my place was the Grand Canyon, but the thing I was doing it for was this idea of us making us better.
Right.
And so I got to the Grand Canyon, and the place was over with, but the group was the responsibility that I accepted. Took me downhill, figuratively and literally, because the Grand Canyon was at 8,000 foot elevation, and everything else was straight downhill to the ocean. Physically, one day, past the Grand Canyon, after we left Arizona, myself and the sport vehicle driver, Drew Fuller, after we left the Grand Canyon, everything was getting further. The cities and civilization was getting fewer and further between, and so we didn't get as much money from donations, and so I decided to cut back on what I was eating. And one day, where it would take me an hour to walk 4 miles, it took me 4 hours to walk 4 miles, and my body shut down on me.
Yeah.
It's like I couldn't do anything. I could barely get it back up into the van, And so that was like a point of physical realization. You need to take care of yourself when you're doing
Yeah,
this.
and